Cool. Hi, I'm Sofia, for those of you who haven't figured that out yet. So you're here for episode 2 of the Backcountry Enabler Series. And we're going to talk about what tools you should have in your backpack, tips and tricks that makes or breaks the day. And we're going to talk about knowing your tools and how to use them. So what we have going on today, we're going to go through the daily process, as I like to call it. We're going to deep dive into backcountry essential gear. We're going to talk about packing for different trips and packing tips. We're going to talk about rescues, survival and communication skills, guide hacks, as I like to call them, shared experience, and we're going to get my friend Holly Walker, which we'll introduce more in detail later, to come and share some experiences that she has. For those of you who were at the first seminar, we talk about the daily process a lot, and this is what you should do every day before you head out into the backcountry. So you want to make sure you get the forecast, you want to plan your trip accordingly, you want to check your gear, and then when you're out there, you want to verify the conditions, you want to use good travel habits, you want to evaluate the slopes, and then you really want to reflect on the day. I think most of us are pretty good at doing all of these, apart from the very last one, reflecting on the day. And just because you didn't have a bad outcome didn't mean you made a good decision. So we start off with the forecast and the conditions. I've created this little quality versus quantity information triangle. And when you sit at home and you try to look and find all the information, it's extremely overwhelming. And it's really hard to know where to start and what to look at. And I would just say, if you're new, start at the top. Start with Avalanche Canada. You have a forecaster who's been sitting and looking at what's been going on at every operation. So all the operations in Canada, almost all of them report back to a guides collecting database. And we tell them what we've been seeing in terms of avalanches, in terms of anomalies, in terms of stability. And then Avalanche Canada will get all this information, including all of the MIN reports, all of the ski resorts, and then they will create a forecast for the area that you're in. So it's kind of like someone's already done all the pre-work for you. Avalanche Canada is an amazing resource. Then we have something called Mountain Conditions Reports. They're put out by Association of Canadian Mountain Guides members. And they're basically a guide writing a report about a day. They're not regular. It's kind of just ask people, please. But most of the time when those come out, it's because something is unusual, or they're going to an area where people don't go very often and there's very little information about. Those are great. And then we have the MIN reports. A MIN report is a report that anyone can create. So anyone who's out skiing can upload information they see on Avalanche Canada in something they call the MIN report. And it can be anything from didn't see any instabilities in the snowpack, we skied good snow, it was a cloudy day, felt great. We skied open slopes, or we stayed in the trees because it was really stormy, or there was a ton of cracking going around over my feet, the snowpack felt hollow, so we turned around at this elevation. All of that information is super valuable. We strongly recommend people to put as many MIN reports in as they can that are relevant. It's great for all the avalanche forecasters because they use that information to create avalanche forecast. And then we have petroleum professionals. If you're skiing around at the ski hill here, you can stop and chat with a patrol and you can see oh, hey, how was this morning? And they can say, oh, we did avalanche bombing over XYZ, or we couldn't get up for 2 hours because it was really foggy and everyone got really angry on the lift lines, and turns out no one understands, so we need to bomb here before we can go here. Whatever it is, it's great information, right? So asking a guide or a patrol, or if you see someone teaching a course, feel free to ask them and being what are you guys doing? What have you seen? Communication in the backcountry and all this stuff is super helpful. Just remember that it's only one person's information that you're gathering now. So it is probably quite biased, and it's also just from what they've experienced and seen, which might not be the broad picture. And then we have South Coast touring. So now we're getting into a lot of quantity, quality not so high. But that's fine, because it's still information that is really good. What's the road up to Red Heather like right now? How can you dry up to Brandywine? How is the sled road? All of that information still helps you get into the backcountry, right? So as much as it's not an avalanche instability, it's a tool we need to know where to go, right? And then we got Instagram or asking friends. Like, ask your friends where they've been out. A ton of the guides right now, and the mountain guides will put out like what they've been doing on social media, just like everyone else. And trust me, like I'm the first one to be like, so where was that? Like, how was your day? So you call it backyard, but was it really the backyard, or was it like somewhere else, or was it like I do that all the time, and it's fine. Maybe they'll just like be like silence, or maybe they'll actually tell you. Maybe they'll say, hey, you should buy this map that I created. Regardless, there's tons of information out there. So like, don't be shy to ask, but it is overwhelming. So if you're gonna start out, just start with Avalanche Canada, the Mountain Conditions Report, and then work your way through there. So when you look at weather to get a forecast for what's gonna happen in the future, there's a few different things you wanna look at. And I have quite a different approach in the evening versus in the morning. In the evening, I will look at mountain weather forecast, which is created together by Avalanche Canada. So there'll be a direct link to it there. If you Google it, just search Mountain Weather Forecast Avalanche Canada, and it'll pop up. It gives you a synopsis for the week, and it'll give you daily details for each day the next coming week, what they think is going to happen with the weather coming in. The spot WX are windy. There's Avalanche Canada, like we talked about, the danger rating. Ask the locals, look at maps. And then in the morning, you want to look at overnight change. Like, is it snowing in Whistler this morning, and was it raining? It was the very first thing I checked. Forecast said it might rain to 2,000 meters. We woke up this morning, and it's snowing in the village, right? So it's one of those times when the forecast wasn't accurate with what we saw. That's why it's really important in the morning again to check the forecast again, because it might have changed. Maybe that pulse of weather that was supposed to come in straight over us got just dissipated, or got sent like straight up north or down south, or like didn't show up here. Maybe it's here earlier than we think. Maybe it's late. All those things are really important. So in the morning, you don't want to spend too much time, but you just want to confirm, like, is the avalanche danger rating the same? What's the weather been doing overnight? Have a quick look at the forecast again to see if it's changed. I'll look at Environment Canada as well, see what's going on. And then drive BC, because we can't go skiing out of our back door. And if the highway is closed, well, rather than adding to the chaos or being super stressed in a lineup on the road, have another coffee and drive later. Or maybe go to the ski hill, or maybe today's not the day. So when we do a pre-trip research, we want to understand what you need to know before you go. You want to know what you don't know. Basically, when I, in the morning, look at the weather forecast and all this stuff, like, where are my question marks? Like, maybe I'm going to a brand new area of terrain, and I'm going to have to do tons of research to figure out what the terrain is like. Like, where can I go? Is it going to go to work up this ramp? Do I need to go around the other side? What aspect is that? Maybe I'm going to a zone I've been to tons, but I've been away for 3 weeks, and I have no idea what's happening in the snowpack since. So that's going to want to be what I'm investigating on, right? So if you're brand new to everything, it is more overwhelming. Going back to the same zone is super helpful in terms of like knowing what the snowpack is doing over time and getting familiarity with terrain. Just helps you being able to explore further. So we want to look at the forecast of danger rating. We want to know what the weather and snow conditions are, and then we want to choose our terrain. And it's important that we don't do this the other way around. We don't start with choosing an objective, then look at the weather and snow conditions, and then the danger rating. Like, try and keep this the same way the whole time. If you're a professional skier, sometimes you create a list for yourself of things you want to ski. Maybe you're lucky and you get to ski like the North Cooler of West the first time you go there. Maybe you go there like 15 times and you still don't get to ski it. That's all normal, okay? But it's just really important that we don't get so focused on the terrain that we start in the wrong end, because that creates biases and gets us really goal-driven, and all those things are not great. So this one is specifically about gear. So gear is so much more than just a purchase, right? You want to get the gear that are up to standard, meaning you want to get a 3-antenna transceiver. You want to get a probe that's accurate length. You want to get skins that fit your skis. Like, all of those things. It's not something that you just buy, like, and satellite device, whatever it is. It's not something that you just need to tick all these purchases off the list and then you're like good to go for a backcountry day. You like thoroughly need to read the instruction manual and know what's going on. So how many people here have read the instruction manual for their transceiver? Honestly. I have because I had to for work. Holly has because she's a Mammut ambassador. Most of us haven't, but honestly, I didn't the first time I purchased it, and I was like, I kind of know how these work. And then I went to a Mammut talk, Mammut Pulse talk from Emmanuel Gamschweit, who created it, and I was just like gasped. I was like, wow, I have no idea what I'm talking about. There's so much information on there. If you've thrown it away, which is very likely, most likely actually, it's online. Don't stress it. But read the instruction manual for your transceiver because they all work quite differently. Like they all work on the same idea, just as a cell phone does. But like going from Android to Apple is so confusing. Okay, so they don't all work the same. You want to practice with it, and then you want to maintain, inspect, repair, and then least replace it, right? So you want to maintain your gear. You want to make sure it's up to standard. Like I got to leather my gloves all the time when I live here because my wet gloves get soaked and they just get destroyed. So I need to like put leather back on them. I need to make sure that my gear dries out overnight. So I'll take my probe and shovel fully apart, take it out of my backpack, and I'll leave it out so it dries all in pieces, and then put it back together again in the morning when it's dry. I want to inspect my gear, like phrase for the cable on your probe is really common. I want to make sure the locking mechanism still works. I want to make sure that like the button on the shovel hasn't like fully fallen out and that's still working. I want to make sure that it's not like dented in any way, it doesn't go together and apart like it should. And then you want to try and repair it if you can. And then if you can't do those things, you might have to replace it eventually. Or your transceiver is like really old and not up to standard anymore. Just like a phone, you need to replace it. So for backcountry essential gear, there's 6 things you really need to have. You need to have a transceiver. You need to make sure that you have batteries that have enough life in them. When do we need to change the batteries in our transceiver? Anyone, just throw numbers at me. I heard 69. It's not right. 50%. Manufacturer recommendation. They're all different. Might be 30, might be 40, might be 50. Read the instruction manual. It'll tell you. They can get updated. So like a lot of the modern ones, transceivers, especially the ones that me and Holly use, the Mammut Verivox S, they can get updated. So could the Pulse ones. So you can actually go to a store. Some stores here has the ability, and they can get updated. Just like your phone tells you that you want to update to the latest like software, your transceiver actually does the same thing now. So you can get updated, but it won't tell you that you can. However, if you keep on up to date, or you like look into that manufacturer that created your transceiver, you can actually see whether there's an update for it or not. And then you might either be able to send it away and get it updated and pick it back up, or you might be able to go somewhere. Maybe there's a rep in town or like in the city, they can help you with that. Shovel, we want to know how to assemble our shovel. We want to make sure that it's a telescopic shovel that extends, not one of those really short ones that don't really do a lot. We want to make sure we know the up-to-date shoveling techniques. Probe, we want to expect it for phrase. We want to know how to probe, technique and length. We need a probe that's at least 320 centimeters, and we want to know how to probe. Communication devices, there's a few different things. You need to have at least 2 that works when you're out there going. Just having 1 isn't really enough, because everyone knows that your phone battery dies really quickly when it's cold. And you want to know how to use them. And then you need a rescue kit. And when we talk about rescue kit, we'll get into it further later, but we're talking about like a first aid kit, an overnight, an extraction ability kit. We just group that all together, and I call it the rescue kit. And then we got the repair kit, which is kind of similar, but it's more specific to like, I broke this toe piece on my binding. This is the replacement thing, or the rivet fell out of my boot. This is the exact rivet that fits into my boot that I'm going to carry with me. All right. So we're going to talk a bit about avalanche accident and rescues. And we're going to talk about ways to reduce consequences of an avalanche involvement. I just want to stress that like all of these things are super important. But the thing they're gonna keep you out of an avalanche mostly is your decision and your terrain management skills. So our goal is to reduce trauma. The tools and techniques we have for that is protective equipment. Anyone throw at me, what's protective equipment? Helmet, clothing, proper clothing for sure, goggles, backpack, all of that stuff helps, right? So in case of trauma, it's a kind of equipment that will keep your body from getting greater trauma. And then we got burial depth, tools and techniques for that. We have airbags. We have releasable gear, meaning don't lock the toes on your tech bindings because you will sink like a ship with them. If you're a snowboarder, you will sink like a ship with it. Don't ski with pole straps around your arms, not just for that, but I've seen so many people dislocate their shoulder, including myself, from really aggressive pole planting. So pole straps, I usually don't ski with them unless I'm on a really long road and need to like pole out. And then you want to make sure you fight, right? Fighting to staying on the surface is going to help you stay on the surface and hopefully decrease your burial depth. And then we got burial time. And now we're talking companion rescue skills, right? And tools that will make you being more findable. That's probably Swinglish. It's probably not a word, but I just made it. We got transceivers, we got probes, we got shovels, and proper companion rescue skills. And then we want to maximize the chance of survival. And then we're kind of talking about potentially having an air pocket or as much A2 oxygen as possible. There's something called an avalanche. If you guys do know about it, we'll talk a little bit more about it later. So the most common causes of death and mortality when we're talking about avalanche incidents, 75% of that is asphyxia, 24% of that is trauma, and 1 is hypothermia. Like a quarter of that is trauma, a quarter of avalanche death. That's quite a lot. So if you don't ski with the proper gear, like you need that stuff, right? Asphyxia, companion rescue skills is the only thing that's really going to help with that, right? And then hypothermia, then we're talking about the rescues potentially. So after potentially you've been found, if there's not adequate gear to keep you warm or safe or get you out of the field, then that's potentially where you'd end up. You're the only one that can decrease this. Only you guys can increase the probability to survive by your terrain decisions, your protective gear, and your companion rescue skills. You have to practice this. All right, so transceivers. You want to make sure you wear it properly in the harness screen facing in. So if you ski into a tree or something like that, the screen is still kind of saved. You want to make sure you wear that harness. So when we talk about transceivers, you want to make sure you have a digital 3 antenna transceivers. Analog transceivers are great for burying into the snow and practice rescuing, but not for anything else. You want to make sure it has a software update. You want to check the hardware shape of it. Corrosion happens really easily, so you really want to make sure to check that. And it's not just fine to check it yourself. You actually need to send it in and make sure someone else checks it to make sure all the function is still working. You want to make sure you have the right type of batteries too. Lithium batteries are no-go. Buy high-end batteries because they're the only ones built to spec. Cheaper brand batteries aren't built to spec. And then you want to make a signal search. So does anyone know what the signal search is? So all transceivers will be able to pick up a signal at different distances. There's something called flagging or signal suppression on your transceivers. Practice using that, okay? We do not signal suppress or flag something until we have probed it. We will go right up to that probe and hit either the signal suppression or the flagging. Not before then, because what might happen? John's over here and Zoe's over here. Well, it turns out I marked that one, probed this one, went looking for the second one, and I never found the other one. It's happened once, which is why you don't flag or signal suppress with your transceiver until you've probed, and you go right to the probe. You want to know how to do multiple burials. So go out and practice that. And you want to have a transceiver that has the ability to do multiple burials, meaning can't flag or do signal suppression. Avalanche transceivers aren't just for avalanche burials either. They're from tree wells as well, or finding a missing person. Someone skied into a tree and hit their head, they're unconscious. But you need to understand that it's not just for avalanche burials. There's plenty of different techniques, so practice that too. Hide close to a tree. Do not hide in a tree well. Hide close to a tree and then have your friends try to find you. Cool, and then when we use our transceiver, we want to know how the signal search work, what the core search is, and how to do a fine search with our transceiver. All the different transceivers, and this is what I usually see people perform the worst when I practice this with people, is at the fine search. People A, go way too quickly, and B, they don't know how to interpret their transceiver. And C, they do this. You want to allow the computer and your transceiver to think. Slow is fast. You don't want to go super slow, but you want to make sure that you're not running faster with your transceiver that your transceiver can handle. If your transceiver tells you to stand still, stand still. They're computers, they're super advanced, and they're so good right now that if you just follow your transceiver at a pace that it can keep up with, you will be successful if you know how to use it. Okay, so there's something called electronic interference with our transceiver, and because of that, there's two different rules, hand rules. When we have a transceiver in send mode, meaning you're sending a signal, you're out skiing for the day, this is what you keep your transceiver at all day, you want to make sure it's at least 20 centimeters away from any electronics. When you have it in search mode, meaning you're now searching for a signal, the computer is working slightly differently in your transceiver, and you need to have at least 50 centimeters away from electronics. Anything like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cell signals, anything magnetic metal, food wrappers, small metal objects, all of that will interfere with your transceiver. So just create a system and keep that the same. Like if you want to keep your phone in your leg pocket and then your emergency uptrack granola bar in one pocket and then your transceiver here, then don't stop stuffing in a bunch of other stuff. Same with your like season pass that they can scan in the lifts. Like don't put that straight on top of your transceiver either. Put that somewhere else. And then you want to understand how to differ during the fine search. So again, where your transceiver properly face in the harness. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have a probe that's long enough. 320 is the longest that they offer in terms of like not industrial sized transceivers or industrial built transceivers. And then carbon versus alloy, they're just different, right? You need to inspect it regardless for cracks to make sure it doesn't break. Carbon's going to be slightly lighter. Alloy will be a little bit more durable. So if you're working or if you're like in really hard snow, alloy is going to perform better. You want to inspect it for cracks and freight cable like we talked about. You want to make sure you know how the locking mechanism works. You want to store it apart so that it dries out. I've seen a lot of people trying to put their probe together when it's been kind of icy and it's just been staying in your backpack for a really long time because it's been wet and frozen. It doesn't work very well. And most of the probes are going to have a depth indication. And I would really try and get a probe that has a really obvious depth indication because it really helps you. Okay, if my lowest number, my transceiver says 0.5, correlates to 50 centimeters, I'm not going to probe 320. That's a massive waste of time. I'm probably going to probe about a meter, but I'm not going to probe more than that. If it's 1.5, maybe I'll probe to 2 meters. You want to shoot over a bit, but you don't need to probe the whole probe length. And it'll save you so much time. And then sometimes I get this question, I just put it in there, piercing cursors with the tip. Is anyone ever worried about like actually like hitting someone, like puncturing them, injuring them underneath the snow? Good. You shouldn't be. Like, get me out of that avalanche with like piercing wounds everywhere rather than like me being stuck and done and staying underneath there. Probes are not only used for avalanche rescues either, right? They're a tool that I use all the time. In the spring, my probe are out so many times during a day. If like I haven't been out a lot and I want to know what's happening maybe to a specific layer or like probably in a bit here, where is that rain crust at? Like how deep is that rain crust at? You'll use your pole, but at some point maybe your pole isn't good enough, the snowpack is stiff enough, you can't use it, maybe you'll have to use your probe. The probe's used for so many different things. If you want to probe for a cornice to see where the cornice starts or ends, you want to make sure you're probing ground, and then when you start not probing ground, we don't go further, we stop right there. you're now on cornice. You want to probe for crevasses to like check bridges to see how solid the bridges are, whether it's holy or not. You want to use your probe too when you do snow profiles. I probably buy a new probe every 2 years because the numbers just wear off on my probe. It's fine otherwise. I'll like throw it into my car for a backup if anyone breaks one or I forget mine at home or whatever. But otherwise, like make sure and inspect your gear to make sure it's fine. Okay, and then when we're probing, everyone understands perpendicular. So if I'm here, it's 90 degrees. If I'm on a really steep slope, it needs to be 90 degrees to that slope. Does that make sense? That's perpendicular. Okay, you want to either probe in a spiral pattern or you want to probe in a square pattern. How many of you guys were taught the cinnamon bun? That's what they always kept telling me. Okay, cinnamon bun is kind of a thing, but now we kind of teach the square pattern a lot because it's a lot visually easier. I really enjoy it. You start in the middle, and then you're probing a square 30 centimeters apart around that, and then you're probing a square 30 centimeters out and around that, and then you just keep doing that. Probing can take quite a while if we have a deep burial, so efficiency is really important. Choose whichever one works for you, but make sure you keep probing to a reasonable depth that correlates with the lowest number in your transceiver when you did your find search. And then when we've probed, we leave that probe in. That probe is the only connection to the person underground. So Lord forbid you move it. Okay, it stays in, which means when you start shoveling, you don't start shoveling right at that probe, okay? You want to start shoveling a little bit back, about shoveling back from it. And then how many of you guys were taught like the flying V? Okay, well, it's out the door. Now it comes to straight line. Okay, which basically means, if you can see it here, if not, then go home and Google shovel strike team rotations. There's tons of good information online about it. We have a person at the front, and then we just line up behind them. And then you're just responsible for an area across, meaning you're just shoveling snow back to the person behind you, moving back and forwards. And that person is moving back and forwards, shoveling that snow behind them, and that keeps on happening. We don't want to build a tunnel, and we don't want to make a hole. We want to make a flat ramp into them so that you can pull them out of that. When we talk about shovels, you want to make sure you have a metal shovel. You want to make sure that you have a D-shaped handle, not a T-shaped handle. You want to make sure the button works for it. You want to make sure that it's extendable, right? It needs to extend out and be a long shovel. Those short ones are not really acceptable. The bigger the blade too, the easier it's going to be to move snow faster. So those really small rounded ones with like super short ones, they fit so well into your backpack and they're not really good for a lot of other things. You want to store it apart to make sure it dries, and you want to leave the probe in. Shoveling is the most time-consuming out of all the companion rescue things we do. So you want to make sure that you're good at it. How long do you think you can shovel for if you're at the front? It depends on your fitness and it depends on the snow, right? You can shovel. You want to make sure that you're shoveling at 100% of your capability. When you start dropping down, either if you can feel it or someone else can see it, we call switch and we switch it up. So when we talk about the probability of survival, after 15 minutes, the survival rates drop to about 40% in general. In a maritime snowpack, you hit 18 minutes and it drops to close to 0% survival rate. So we want to make sure that we know how to use our tools here. The companion rescue skills are what saves lives. Go out and practice these with your friends. It builds trust in each other and it makes you feel so much better about your own ability. You should practice these skills every year and every time you get new equipment. And then like we talked about, we have some other tools too. To be used successfully, both the airbag and the Avalanche has to become second nature or muscle memory. It needs to be like an instinct to use the tool. They're both great. Avalanches have been around for quite a long time. And the hypothesis behind them is that it draws oxygen from the snowpack and expels carbon dioxide behind you. They've only been tested in like a lab kind of scenario, so this isn't from actual avalanche accidents. But the whole idea is that the subject would get less susceptible to hypoxia. Then we have airbags, which are kind of working on the Brazil nut theory, meaning like you have a trail mix bag. When you shake it around, the biggest nuts kind of just ends up at the top of the bag. That's kind of the whole point of the airbag. It's not to like protect your neck or anything like that. There's nothing that said that these are good when it comes to trauma on a patient. Communication devices. Right, so when we talk about communication devices, there's 3 general ones. There's the one we probably all are most familiar with called a cell phone. When you're ski touring, you gotta make sure you turn the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi off of your phone, okay? So I will just go into airplane mode. It also means that if you're using mapping services on your cell phone and you need Wi-Fi for that, you need to download your maps, because otherwise when you head out of cell service, you no longer have the ability to use that. Apart from cell phone, when we talk about communication devices, we have radios, and they're 2-way radios. There's 2 different kinds. One that we call a VHF radio, which means very high frequency radio, and one that's more of a walkie-talkie style radio. You kind of quite often maybe have seen people in them. They like talk to each other on the resort, or when they're out sledding or skiing or whatever. And we'll talk about the differences there soon. We got GPSs, like old school GPS only kind of devices. And then we got personal location beacons, and we have sat phones. So satellite devices, there's a few different ones. There's 2-way communication satellite devices, and there's 1-way satellite devices. So we have sat phones that you obviously can call someone on. Then we have things like the Solio or the InReach, the Spot devices. Them are 2-way communications, most of the Spots are. Some of them are only 1-way. It means that all you can do with them is hit SOS, but you can't actually text back and forwards. That's quite a difference in the ability that you're carrying with you. So just know what you're buying when you're buying it and understand the differences in terms of its abilities and limitations. So PLBs, if you ever see that, it's used fairly often. It means personal location beacon, which just means one of these little things that sends out GPS saying, like, this is where you are, kind of thing. A GPS doesn't have the communication ability. It just shows you the location where you are. And most like OG GPS units only can't like put an SOS on them. Most of them now can like do all of these things. Sat phones and a lot of the personal location beacons are 2-way communication. You need to buy a monthly plan for them, and they're usually fairly costly. So just choose the one that's right for you. If you're gonna get something, I would steer away from the whole sat phone and go for a personal location beacon with 2-way communication. Sat phones will drop calls sometimes. They're also heavy and they're more expensive. A lot of these personal location beacons you can hook up via Bluetooth to your phone. So they're tiny now and they're really hard to text on. Some you still can, and some you need to have Bluetooth to be able to send 2-way communications with. Meaning, if your phone dies and you now can't text via an app on your phone, the only thing you can do with it is hitting SOS, which means 1-way communication, right? But you need to have it all. You need to have the personal location beacon, you need to have a spare battery for your phone, and then you need to have your phone. Yeah, and then some of them have a screen on them and some of them don't. And then we got radios. We got VHF radios, very high frequency radios, and we got GMRS radios called General Mobile Radio Services, or UHF, mean ultra high frequency. They're a little bit different, so you need to understand what it is that you're getting into. A VHF radio, you need a license for. It's not complicated, nor is it expensive. You can get it online. It takes like maybe a couple hours to half hour of your time. You need to get it yearly. It's easy, it's cheap, and it puts you through some of the information that you need, because you're now operating on the same frequency as like EMS services do, or like the ski or the heli-ski companies do, because you're hooking up to antennas. So that comes with a lot of responsibility and privileges, and therefore you need to take this course and have a license. They're really good because you can use them on FSR, that's also Swenglish. You can use them on login roads. There's different channels. It's posted online, so you can download them. But you actually aren't legally allowed to program it yourself. So you need to hand it in to someone that has the software and ability to program it. Some of them, however, are field programmable. I'm just going to leave it at that. And they have really long range, right? Which means that you can not just reach your friend that is in the same little bowl as you. You can actually hit an antenna and reach someone who's on the other side of a ridge, potentially. They do have areas where they don't work, and you still need to be in proximity of that antenna or it's not going to work. And you need to have the right channels, meaning I have a radio that had a ton of channels that were great working interior, but I needed to reprogram it when I came here because I didn't have the right channels for here. Quite often, the people that do get called to your rescue might be a helicopter that's being used for heli skiing. So you actually have the ability to call those people that are out there if you're in a pickle. GMRS radios, you don't need an ISO for them, which is great. They don't connect to VHF channels though, so you won't be able to jump on any of those channels. But they're awesome to talk to your group and each other. They use tons between sledders when you're out there because you may be further apart or there's loud noises going on. So you can have the like little mic in your head, helmet. They're used a tons for like media teams and filming. Like we use these all the time. Like, is this the line I looked at? Am I on top of this thing? No, it's the pillar to the right of you. Okay. Like just making sure you're in the right spot and all that stuff. Or looks good, yeah, drones in the air, wherever, all the communication you want to make sure that you have going on. If someone's going to scope a line, you can like talk to each other. It adds a lot of comfort. Communication is so important in the backcountry. They don't sync with other brands though. So if you're getting like a type of brand, one of them, the whole group kind of need to invest in the same brand. And they have a fairly short range. So they don't work when you go on one side of the ridge and another side of the ridge. That makes sense? And then we got the massive rescue kit, which is huge. I'm not going to read all of this, but you need a first aid kit. You need a bigger first aid kit, something that can stop a bleed or a puncture. You need all of those things. You need something that you can deal with hypothermia with, right? So warm layers. Tea is awesome to get the core body temperature warmed up of someone. You want to make sure you have some kind of shelter to keep them out of the elements. Full blankets, or like little tinfoil blankets, are okay too. They're good to use. You want to make sure you have something you can stay overnight. You can either build or make a shelter, warm layers, a headlamp. If you're going to glacier, you obviously need different type of rescue things, right? You need GPS track or something that can show you where you are on a GPS. You need some kind of shelter, crevasse rescue kit, harness, ropes, sleeping bag, pad, shelter, food, cooking, mortar, and then you also need things to repair those things. You need extraction ability every day. So types of infrared toboggan, if that's the same as your shelter, that's great. Some kind of repair kit. Ski straps are awesome. And then sometimes I'll carry a rope rescue kit. So if I'm skiing like a pillow zone or a really cliffy zone or those kind of areas that are really fun to ski, and we have a lot of them on the coast, it's really easy to get cliffed out as well. I've done it before. So you want to make sure you have some kind of like rope and sling that you can actually get people out of a pickle, like if they're stuck somewhere, or at least secure them for the time being. You need to understand what you're packing for, right? Are you packing for a day trip off the resort here? Are you packing for a day trip in a Duffy where it's way more remote? Are you packing for a multi-day trip? And how close or remote are you in terms of rescue, right? Like those are quite different mindsets and approaches. So instead of seeing it as like, this is the things that always go into my backpack, you need to like actually critically think about what you're doing. So there's a few standard items I always keep in my repair kit: baling wire, hose clamp, a screwdriver with a bit that fit my bindings, because each binding is different. Some kind of like Leatherman tool, and duct tape at least, or some kind of like patches for gear. You need boot binding skin specific parts. Like I always have a tail clip with me, and I always have a rivet and screws that are specific for screws are specific for my bindings, and rivets that are specific for my personal boots. So if you have gear, you can actually either go into a hardware store and try to find things, or sometimes they'll normally carry a lot of small things. So I will literally buy my boots and the same day be like, okay, I need spare parts for these. They're like, but they're not broken. I was like, but they will be. And if they get broken, I need pieces. You need to have enough gear that you can get back to your car on your own, because a small gear malfunction quite often turns into a search and rescue call here, and that's quite unacceptable. It can turn into a life-threatening event in terms of hypothermia quite easily if you don't have the right gear with you. No one ever plans for this stuff to happen. It just does, okay? It's called an accident and an incident for a reason, but you need to be prepared for it. Okay, so how does a rescue work? So if you have one of those personal location beacons and you hit SOS, that SAT device is now sending a signal to something they call the IERCC. It's the headquarters for that company's like communication center. So it's not just one. Depending on which one you buy of all the different brands, it'll send a message to that headquarters center. And then they got to contact the 911. So literally, if you own an InRage, you're sending a message to Texas. Or you're trying to explain that you're in a backcountry ski touring pickle and they're like, ski touring? Then that message gets translated to 911. Then 911 calls search and rescue. Then search and rescue gather all the troops and they get to you. So search and rescue is a volunteer organization. A lot of those people are already, they're super highly trained, but like they have families too, right? They're not just like sitting at home waiting for their call. Like they're putting their kids to bed. They're getting up a really long shift, like at the ambulance or ski patrolling, and then you're calling them because you didn't bring a shelter and you're worried you're gonna be cold overnight. If you really need a rescue, you should call a rescue. My whole point I'm trying to make is that you need enough gear that if you have a small gear malfunction or a small injury that's easily taken care of by getting out of the field, you need to have the capability to get out of the field. And save emergency phone numbers in your phone. Like I have phone numbers to all the helicopter hangars, heli-skiing companies, ski patrol, because as much as we need a case number for search and rescue to come to you and pick you up. I've also before then been able to call the helicopter pilot or actually text him in my InRage and being like, hey, I just sent a message for a rescue. This is where we are. This is who you're dealing with. And they was like, oh, hey, cool, Sofia. Like, are you okay? It's like, yeah, we're fine, but this person has injured their knee and we need to get out. So far in BC, search and rescue is free. There is also a few like private insurance companies. There's one called Team with 2 A's in Squamish that offers private insurance for aerial rescues, which is great, okay? Meaning it might not be an emergency, but you might need to like fly your sled out or whatever it may be because like something broke and you weigh it on the Pemberton ice field. That's a great insurance for that kind of stuff. So when you try to choose what to pack, you wanna think about the terrain complexity and the route. Like, what do you expect to encounter? Do you need any special equipment? Like, are you boot packing up a cooler and you might need crampons and an ice axe? Where are you going? How remote is it and how close to help is it? How self-sufficient do you need to be? What kind of weather is it? Is it minus 30 and you should probably pack like tons of hand warmers? Like, I will even pack sometimes a little pot in my backpack when it's super, super cold out so I can make tea if we have to stay overnight. Like, all of those things are gonna influence what you're packing into your backpack. And what's the communication ability where you're going? Are you literally just going right off somewhere you know where you have cell service, where you probably don't need to pack like a radio and an InReach and 2 cell phones and all that stuff? You can probably pare it down a little. So you just really think about where you're going. And when you're new, I would say pack more than less. So pre-packing, we have the personal gear and we have group gear lists. So a lot of the things you need to carry on you, but a lot of these things we can divvy up. Like we don't need 5 communication devices if you're a group of 5. We don't need 5 rescue kits. So when you're out ski touring, really think about what you can divvy up and what you cannot. And then the special packing lists, like are you glacier skiing? Is it spring gear? Are you going camping? Just like having something that helps you keep you organized is super useful. So just make sure that like past you, think about how future you are gonna feel in the morning when you're waking up at 5:30 to go ski touring. Then future you are gonna be stoked that past you put out this list, or you can just like tick all the boxes as you put them into your car. So there's kind of 2 different mindsets. We have the fast and light approach, and now we have the necessary gear approach. Fast and light is like good, but it's I kind of sometimes call it the European mindset versus like the North American mindset. You'll see people out there that has super minimal gear, and that's fine, right? They probably are super experienced in terms of where they're going. They're probably knowing that their safety margins are way slimmer if something happens, and they're personally okay taking that risk. Are you only packing for yourself, or are you packing as a group? Because if when you pack together as a group and you can spread some of that heavy stuff out, it makes a massive difference. Like weight really does matter when you're ski touring. It really influences your ability to move easily. your ability to follow the estimated timelines and plan accordingly. So when you make a route plan and you think this is going to take 4 hours, you don't want to pack and then suddenly it takes 6 hours because your backpack was so heavy, okay? But you need to be able to be self-sufficient, having enough necessary gear that you're ready for the day in any kind of emergencies you may encounter. We want to do potato sack packing, meaning everything goes into your backpack. Like strapping your shovel, probe, or anything on the outside of your backpack, prohibited. That's your rescue gear. Like if you now fall over or get tumbled around by a bit of snow and you lose your shovel, that's not acceptable, right? No Christmas tree, please. Frequent use gear goes on top, pockets. Rescue emergency heavy gear goes at the bottom and towards your back so that you don't destroy your back when you're out ski touring. Put things in waterproof sacks. It rains a lot here and it snows really wet. That emergency puffy that you want to bring with you, put it in a waterproof stuff sack at the bottom of your backpack. And make sure the backpack fits properly. Create your own system that works for you and do things in the same order every time. Just because your friend likes taking their skis off first and then putting their helmet on doesn't mean you should. Just because your friends have this boot and that ski doesn't mean you should, right? Get gear that you like, that fits you and that works for you, and create a system that works for you. Like I literally do things the same every time when I go ski touring. I fold my skins in half because it makes it easiest to pull them apart. I layer up first when I get to a transition, delayer last when I'm at a transition at the bottom to make sure I keep my warm layers on for as long as possible and get a warm layer on as long as possible. I have a ski scraper in my pocket because I always have to use it on my skis before I get going. I have ski strap in my pocket, so if I want to throw my skis on my backpack, that's super easily and fast done. I have a centimeter marks on my ski pole, so I can actually just put my pole in and be like, it's 20 centimeters on the crust, it's 50 centimeters on the crust. All that helps a lot. And then I have a down jacket in a waterproof stuff sack at the bottom, and I always put electrolytes in there too. If you don't know, hire a guide, take more courses, or learn from someone that's more experienced. Join a group or organization or anything. Like, there's so much information out there. Okay, so just think about your safety margins. When we talk about risk, there's 4 things that goes into risk. We talk about the likelihood of something happening and the magnitude, like how big something would be. We talk about exposure to something, and then we talk about vulnerability. And all of those things create risks. Just think about your safety margins when you're out there and when you're packing. So when any of those increase, the risk increases too, right? And we've talked about human biases a bit in the past. We'll just go through them quickly. This familiarity, meaning I've been here a million times, it's going to be fine, it never slides. Acceptance, I'm brand new to this group of people that I'm ski touring with, so I'm kind of just going to stay quiet because I don't want to create an awkward conversation or speak up and be like, I'm not quite fine with that. It's hard. It's super hard to do in a new group. We got the commitment bias, like I'm going to ski that line. We got the expert halo. That's like when you guys go ski touring with like Holly or me, I'm probably going to be able to say, jump off the cliff, and you'll jump off the cliff. Maybe not that drastically, but like that's what we're talking about. We call it track scarcity. Does anyone remember musical bumps last year when that slid, although there was a bazillion tracks on it? Social proof, that's like, do it for the gram. Risk tolerance, that's inherently different, and it also changes depending on just the day, like your day form, how you're feeling that day. Changes with experience too. It's important that you talk about where your risk tolerance is at when you talk about the route before you're leaving to go ski touring. And then there's competition, which like happens all the time here when you run up to like the what is it called? 3.5 notch, that notch? Guides notch, all that stuff. It's like the fast person there wins. You just really got to get there before everyone else. That's called competition, and it's not always great in the backcountry. These are human biases that are dangerous to decision making. So avalanche accidents occur when we have avalanche terrain, avalanche conditions favorable for avalanches, and backcountry travels in them. You might have avalanche conditions and backcountry travels, but you're not in avalanche terrain. You're on flat ground, way far away from it.
Very good.